So I see a bunch of people making this mistake that are relatively new to plants. They get in new plants, they put them in their aquarium, and then there may be something that happens to them where they either melt or lose some leaves, and all of a sudden they take it out and they put it somewhere else, maybe in a different aquarium. This is a huge problem, and we're going to go into why. What's going on, guys? Justin from H2Oplants.com, and today we're talking about the biggest problem that I think plagues new aquarium plant hobbyists, and as well as houseplant hobbyists. And I actually have this houseplant here to demonstrate my point. Now, this is a brand new philodendron species that we got. It starts with an X. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's also called narrowleaf sometimes, and it's a beautiful plant here. We just got it from the nursery a day ago, and you can see here it's still in its nursery pot. So when it comes to having new plants, what you want to do is you want to remember wherever they're going from, they're coming into a new environment. When it comes to houseplants, that has to do with the light that you're putting them in, whether it's a bright sunny room or maybe a dimmer room than what they're used to, as well as different types of humidity and weather conditions, because now they're maybe indoors where they were grown probably outdoors. What you want to do with houseplants, right, you don't unpot them right away. You typically leave them in the pot for at least a week, sometimes longer is recommended. I usually wait at least 2 weeks to a month to repot, just because I don't want to put them into shock. It's going to shock the roots and whatnot. So typically, if you were to get a plant shipped to you, whether it's a house plant or an aquarium plant, you want to kind of do the same thing. So let's talk about aquarium plants. When you get aquarium plants, right, you want to just take it and put it in its spot and leave it be. Let it do its thing. It's going to be okay 90% of the time. What you don't want to do is when you put it in there and you see a leaf that maybe starts to melt like this, where it's melting off, or you have some browning, or whatever the case is, you don't want to immediately uproot it and move it somewhere else. The reason being is the plant has already begun its transition period into your new tank setup. So what you want to keep in mind when you get aquarium plants in, especially from us, is that they were grown somewhere else. We get them in from our suppliers, most of them. There's some that we grow here, but for the most part, we get them in from suppliers. We put them in our tanks, and they start establishing and transitioning, much like this one is. And you can see all these old leaves are melting off here, and there's a brand new leaf down here, which is what we're looking for, right? This is the important thing, this new leaf. If I remove this old leaf here, you can see that new leaf there, and that's the important part, right? So when it comes to this plant, you want to put it in the ground in your tank and just leave it be. You don't want to move it, because what happens is when these leaves start to die back or melt or get holes in them, and you go and uproot it, this plant was already trying to figure out its new conditions where you just planted it, and all of a sudden you said, nope, I don't like you there, and either maybe you threw it in a different tank thinking it'll do better there, or you moved it to a different area of the aquarium for some reason. But guess what? The plant was already trying to do its things where you planted it. Odds are it already shot down new roots, because roots grow rather quickly typically, and you basically put the plant into shock again. So all of a sudden, it was just starting to get used to somewhere that you just put it in, and now it has to get used to a new area. And what's going to happen is you're going to stress the plant out even more, which could lead to it dying. So when you plant the plant, just leave it be. You don't want to go and you don't want to stir up the substrate. You don't want to kind of look to see any, if anything's good. You could give it a light tug just to see if it's rooted yet, but you just really, honestly, I don't recommend messing with them. I just say put them in, leave them be, don't touch them. Let them do their thing. Either they're going to survive or not. I've killed probably 3 plants to every 1 plant that I've grown successfully in my tanks, so you have to take that into consideration. You may kill a couple plants, and that's okay. I've killed a couple of house plants, I've killed a couple of aquarium plants, actually quite a bit of aquarium plants, but that happens because every plant is different, and every tank condition is different also. So your tank condition can be slightly different than what it was grown in, both here or wherever else you may get the plants. Even taking a plant out of one tank and say putting it in another tank in your same home could lead to it melting back, dying back, and whatnot. So it's really ideal when you get a new aquarium plant in, plant it in your aquarium, leave it be for at least, I recommend 4 weeks, let it do its thing, because usually for the first week or two it's going to melt back a lot. You may see 1 or 2 new leaves, but once the roots really establish and they get a good anchor, you're going to start seeing leaves every couple of days on most plants. So it's ideal that you leave them be. Now, I did want to touch on a couple other plants too. For those that were wondering, this is a sword plant. I believe it's a red ocelot sword that we had growing, and it is a rosette type plant. And what a rosette type plant is, it's basically a portion of the plant is kind of like a root ball, and all the leaves come out of from a center mass. It doesn't shoot out runners, it doesn't have like a rhizome, and it doesn't shoot out runners. So it's really important to keep that in mind. This rosette, as long as this rosette survives, I've had swords where I've lost all the foliage down to just the bare root, and it's sprouted new leaves. So as long as the rosette survives, the plant will still come back even if it loses all of its leaves most of the time. So keep that in mind when maybe you get a sword and it may die back a lot or a little, and as long as that survives, it'll still come back. You just don't want to keep moving it or putting stuff around it or shuffling the dirt around or anything like that, because it really just needs to settle in. Now let's talk about stem plants. This is a big one that I get quite often because it happens more often than not. And keep in mind, aquarium plants are super sensitive to temperature fluctuations. If it goes a little too hot or a little too cold, inside the shipping bags, the aquarium plant will actually start to melt back its leaves. Especially if it gets too hot, the leaves will almost automatically turn brown, and that's because they are super sensitive to temperatures. House plants can actually tolerate it a bit better because most of these are grown outdoors in nurseries and in greenhouses. So they're kind of already used to that outdoor temperature, where aquarium plants, they're grown inside of controlled environments usually, and those temperatures are specific to their growing habits, which have to do anywhere between usually about 70 degrees to all the way up to about 82. If you live in the middle of, say, Texas, where it's 100 degrees plus this current week, and you get a plant shipped to you, some of the leaves may be wilted or brown, which is completely fine, because as long as, say, a stem plant's stems are still solid and they're not complete mush or still have their green color, like this one is particularly just a little faded color, but this is actually completely fine, and it has new growth already starting to pop off of its old nodes, but it lost the majority of its leaves. And this just came from our nursery, put it in our tank, and shedded a lot of its leaves. It's going to rebound, it's going to set off side shoots, and they're actually going to be red opposed to the green color that this plant is. This is Hygro Aragoya. We sell it on our site, and it's a very good red plant. So the thing to keep in mind when you have stem plants is you're going to lose probably all the foliage that is existing. Even if it was grown completely submerged, it's going to shed all of its existing leaves. For the most part, it may keep a couple, but it's going to lose a lot of them. And then new side shoots are going to appear. You may even lose parts of the stem, like the top part may start melting back or the bottom part may start melting back. The best thing to do in that scenario is chop just slightly under or above where it's melting at, and then replant the good solid portion. The good solid portion will normally sprout new leaves. And to demonstrate that point, I have this here. This is a Rotella macandra species. And you can see here the bare stem. Now this came from our nursery, which this complete plant was grown out of the water. And you can see here the stem is completely bare from this point on, but up at the top we have some leaves. And that's all the new growth here. But I also want to point out is right at the bottom there, right there, you can see there's new leaves popping up, and that's a brand new stem. So you got to really just take into consideration that the stem plants are going to go through this transition. They're going to shed a lot of their leaves. They're going to start growing new buds off the stem itself, as long as the stem is solid. And I mean, this stem looks a little brown, but it's still solid. It's not mushy, and you'll be able to tell if it's mushy because it'll literally dissolve in your fingers. The fact that it's firm and it's not mushy indicates that this is still a healthy, viable stem, and it will continue producing new plants. But what I wouldn't do right away when you get this plant and say it loses all of its leaves, I wouldn't start trimming. I would let it be same thing for at least 2 to 3 weeks, and then you could cut the bottom portion out, remove it, and replant the top. And that way the top is already adjusted to your tank environment, and you could toss the bottoms if you want, or leave the bottoms and they'll sprout new side shoots, because stem plants, as long as they're healthy, they will shoot out side shoots from every single leaf node, basically wherever a leaf was, and you'll be completely fine with them. I also wanted to talk about bulb plants, because bulb plants are super sensitive plants. If you don't know what a bulb plant is, it's basically a plant that has a bulb like this, and the leaves come out of it. They could grow rather tall. They're usually mostly lily type plants or these epongatons, and these leaves are super sensitive. They will melt under the slightest conditions, and they will lose all of their foliage. But as long as the bulb is already a sprouted bulb, which we only sell sprouted bulbs, we don't sell bulbs, we don't get in bulbs that aren't sprouted. So we know that every single bulb we sell is a sproutable bulb and will continue producing sprouts as long as the bulb is healthy. When it comes to a bulb, you can see there's this little tiny piece right here plopping up there, and that is actually a brand new leaf. Now all these leaves can be removed and there can be nothing there, and so long as the bulb is healthy, it'll send up new leaves, just because this is where it stores all of its cell making material, all of its kind of DNA and stuff like that that produces new leaves. So as long as the bulb isn't soft or squishy, it'll be completely fine. And so now the last set of plants I want to touch on is rhizome plants. And the reason why is because rhizome plants can be a bit tricky or a bit deceiving, really. When you first get in, say, this 4-leaf clover, right? And I've done a whole video on 4-leaf clover. I'll link it above if you want to check it out. But you can see here all this green foliage, and it looks pretty, right? But this foliage isn't going to last. This is going to melt all back. You're going to lose all of it. Where you're going to be left with is something that resembles this. And let's get it up close there so you can see it. But what you can see here is there's a little green that's sprouting up, and that is the new plant. So what happens a lot of the times that I see that people have issues with this, either one, they bury it too deep, or two, they plant it and it starts to melt back and they think it's dead. Well, here's the thing. This plant has an underground rhizome that produces all these new little shoots. And if you were to, say, pull up this clump once it starts dying back a bit, and you remove it, you just kind of completely ruined your chances of having it survive. Because after almost only about 2 weeks, it'll have new growth like this, and most of the leaves will die back and you could cut them out and it'll have all this new growth. And that's what you're really looking for. You're looking for this new growth to pop up, and that's the most important thing. If you have new leaves that are showing, they'll be completely fine. You just have to wait until that point, and I know it sometimes requires a lot of patience, but the best thing is to just plant them and leave them be. That is about it for the biggest problem that I see new aquarium plant owners have. Leave your plants be, don't move them around, and you'll probably be better off. It's a mistake that tons of us make. Trust me, I've been there, I've done it, and it just causes more issues than it solves. Plant your plants, leave them be, see what grows. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video or maybe I helped you out, make sure you leave a like and leave a comment down below. Let me know what your biggest plant problems or mistakes were when you first got into plants. Maybe we'll do a video on it. Anyway, if you're new here, you could click the circle icon to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any aquascaping or plant-a-tank tips in the future. And if you want to support this channel and support these videos, you can head on over to our website, h2oplants.com, and pick up any of the plants you saw, as well as many more things. And if you want to check out our video on how to deal with melting plants, you can click up top. If you want to check out our video on how to plant aquarium plants, you could click down there. And I will see you guys on the next one.